Welcome to Understanding Russia, a student-led podcast from Belgorod State University. I'm your host, Ian. I have taken it on myself to try to explain this place that Churchill called a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. It turns out that Russians don't find Russia too mysterious. Well, most of the time. Each podcast will delve into a particular aspect of Russian life, and you'll be hearing the real voices of Russians translated into English, so you can find out what they think of their country. When I was offered a job in Russia a few years ago, the advice I received varied in colour, from "you must be out of your mind" to "at least you'll have the KGB looking after you," and all shades in between. The more rational of my friends were watching the news and offering opinions like, "Why would you leave the rich, free, democratic world for a cold dictatorship?" By cold, they meant wintry. The thing is, nearly all of them were totally negative, and I found myself defending my decision, defending Russia, and trying to explain using phrases like, "Well, it's not as simple as that," or "if you look at it from their point of view," or "the KGB was renamed in 1995. It seemed that my friends had formulated their opinions from Bond films, the BBC's reasonable reporting, and Elton John videos, and they were the positive ones. In the end, they would usually end up deferring to my point of view because I had an ace in my hand. I had actually been to Russia. I had learned Russian as a student and had first-hand experience of the place. That little advantage made me feel good for a while, but then I realised that all I was doing was substituting my views for Elton's, Ian Fleming's or the BBC. Another revelatory moment was when I realised that most people don't have the time or inclination to understand what's going on in their own country, let alone someone else's. A few years ago, I started listening to podcasts. For me, it was a natural move. I'm a radio person. So I started listening to programmes on science, comedy, history and culture while walking the dog, cooking and going to work. I never thought I'd be hosting one, but now I consider this the best way of getting info on the go. My aim is not to give you an opinion, but introduce you to the culture of this vast and fascinating country through the words of the people who live here. Traditionally, Russians have not been very good at presenting their point of view in a world that demands it. Their problem is not unique. Think about the sum total of your knowledge of any non-English speaking country. That was probably all the time you need for your knowledge of Bhutan. The truth is that countries only come into our consciousness when there's some kind of conflict, and then we try to recall any relevant information and add to it by reading a Wikipedia article on our phone. In an age where fear rules politics, knowledge and empathy provide the antidote. It is best to think of the world in terms of a town containing 206 families. Some families are massive but poor, some are small but rich, most families have intermarried at some point, and at some point they all had a common grandparent. We need to look at how we treat and understand our neighbour's point of view and recognise our own flaws as we point out those of our neighbour. I hope to do this with a sense of humour and with openness and respect. You're listening to Understanding Russia. Well, that said, it's time to meet our first Russian. This young man, well, he's a student. He's also my friend, and you'll be hearing a lot from him on this podcast. I started off by asking him how he was.
Miserable as always, Ian. And you?
I'm actually very happy. I'm happy to be here. So you're a real Russian?
Indeed I am. And as far as I know, you are not.
I am definitely not a real Russian. Although I do some real Russian things.
Like what?
I eat soup with cabbage. I laugh at bad jokes. So we'll go through that, shall we?
You're wounding my Russian pride. I love my soup with cabbage. So, can I ask you some questions?
Fire away.
Okay, so you said that you were in Russia before, when you were a student. What was it like the first time you came to Russia?
Well, the first time I arrived in Russia, I was, as you say, a student. It was 95, so a long time ago, longer than I care to remember. My story of coming to Russia was quite long and convoluted, but I actually arrived on the train. So my first experience with Russians was with the most stereotypical Russians you could possibly imagine.
Russian railroads, yeah.
Yeah, so I ended up in Coupe, which is, for anybody that knows the Orient Express, it is one of those lovely little compartments with sleeping arrangements, but I was not alone. I was joined at Berlin, Ostbahnhof, by a couple of very happy, shall we say, inebriated Russians who were so drunk, in fact, that they didn't notice I was there until the following day. The story is long and arduous, and it involves a lot of alcohol and a lot of disbelief. They did not believe that a British person would be on a train from Berlin to St. Petersburg I didn't realise that the train journey would be 2 days and not one. Yeah. It's then I realised just how big this country is. Well, for anyone from the West, if you're not American, distances in Russia will blow your mind. I ended up on the train for 2 days, but luckily my drunken friends supplied me with all the food and hospitality that I could ever possibly want.
By hospitality, you mean special Russian liquid hospitality, or what do you mean?
That too, definitely. So they bought me food when we got to Belarus. Belarus was an interesting moment in the journey. I tried to get off to stretch my legs and to be depressed about the fact my journey had doubled in length in the course of a few minutes. And they told me I couldn't get off in Belarus because I had no visa. But my Russian being quite poor at the time, I didn't really understand what was going on until one of my Russian friends said, no, the armed guard in front of you will shoot you if you get off the train. So I thought better of it. I got back onto the train and they provided me with boiled potatoes in a bag. Through the window. There were ladies selling us provisions through the window at Grodno train station because we weren't allowed to leave. And they provided us with vodka, roast chicken, lovely boiled potatoes in dill. We had lots of dried fish, salty, to go with the vodka. So yes, it was quite an eventful journey, and I wasn't even in Russia yet. By the time I got to Russia, I had already been immersed in the culture. I was loving every minute of it.
Yeah, Russian sustenance is a beautiful thing. You didn't have a problem getting a visa then?
Well, I didn't have a visa for Belarus, but I did obviously have a visa for Russia.
Oh.
So when I arrived in Russia, everything was absolutely fine. Getting a visa is an interesting proposition now as it was then. If you're going to travel to Russia or indeed anywhere outside the European Union, you need to go through a prolonged process of examination. You're asked 100 questions about your work and your parents' work and who your wife was married to in the past. It can be quite Byzantine in structure. And so I was slightly intimidated by the idea that I would get to the Russian border and they would give me another interrogation about my father's inside leg measurement or some such useless piece of information just to give me a hard time. But in the event, I don't even remember crossing the border. So it must have been quite smooth sailing. Now, when I come back to Russia, we have to go back to the UK every now and again to get visas to come back. And it's still quite an internecine process and quite involved. I think mainly now it's the expense that's involved in travelling to Russia that puts a lot of people off.
Expense, you mean it is too costly to get a visa, or the journey itself is too costly, like tickets or accommodation during your trip? Or
well, once you're in Russia, there's no problem. Accommodation is cheap and good and plentiful. The cost of tickets flying into Moscow seems to be much more expensive than flying into other places near Russia. So yes, I mean, there seems to be a disparity in pricing, but it's also the process of doing it. If I book a holiday in the UK to go to Turkey, for example, there are no real procedures to go through. I simply book the holiday, I get on the plane. When I get to Turkey, then they stamp my passport and say, welcome to Turkey. Whereas that is not an experience you'll have coming to Russia. But if you can get past that, it is an amazing place to come, as thousands of football fans will attest.
So you're a football fan, I see. How did you find the World Cup, which was recently concluded?
Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, I was working the entire time of the World Cup. So I was working with my students here in Belgorod, and I didn't get a chance to attend any of the matches. But having said that, the nearest match to me was in Rostov, and Rostov is how far from here?
Oh, I wouldn't know. I'm geographically illiterate, so...
But it's a long way. So going to Rostov from here is a journey of a good few hours, even if you fly. And that's the nearest venue we had. And Moscow. Moscow is what, about 300-400 miles from where we're sitting today. So journey times in Russia are measured in days, not hours, very often. I didn't have the opportunity really to go to any of these games. It would have been a major undertaking to get to the World Cup, but I did watch it on television with a lot of disappointed Russians.
You mean disappointed Russians which were with you, or you mean our team, or just in general?
The World Cup was, I think, considered a great success in Russia. Russians are very hospitable and they love to meet people from around the world. That's one of the great things about this country that I loved coming here, is that I've been welcomed fully.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
Russia is quite a secretive society in lots of ways, meaning people don't usually give personal information out freely. But when I've come to Russia, I've found that people want to speak to me, they want to be my friends, and it is a friendly culture. Russians themselves are very welcoming, very nice people generally.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you like our Russian hospitality, but football is something which connects you to your motherland, to Britain. As far as we know, football is very big in Britain, culturally close to you. So, when you first got to Russia, have you experienced this nebulous culture shock?
I didn't. That's probably more to do with me. I was very excited by the idea of coming to Russia, mainly because everybody else was excited by the prospect of not coming to Russia. Most people, they thought of Russia as some kind of strange place to be. Why would you go there? There are so many other places that would be nicer to visit. Why didn't you learn Italian at university? Why did you learn Russian? Italy's much nicer than Russia. I didn't experience culture shock because I'm not that kind of person. I do enjoy the process of visiting new places. There are things that you can't do or you couldn't do in Russia when I first arrived that you can do now. I mean, the difference between coming to Russia in the 90s and now is that there really isn't very much difference here. There's internet, there's hot, cold, running water. Everything works as it should do. It's just slightly different.
Well, yeah, I guess it changed since then. I wouldn't know. I wasn't born back then. I wasn't conceived. But you've mentioned that your knowledge of Russian wasn't as good as it is right now. So at first, it must have been pretty difficult for you to survive without being able to buy everything you want because you simply cannot describe it.
That's true, but there is a Russian word, можно, and on my finger, which I used to great effect. Можно means may I, and I pointed. And usually people understood what I meant, and I offered them money, and they seemed to give me goods for it. So even when I didn't know Russian, there wasn't a huge problem getting what I wanted. The main problem with getting what I wanted was I didn't know what I was buying, because everything was in Cyrillic, and everything had a strange name, even if you translated it into English, and some things were untranslatable. So, for example, meat. There are different kinds of meat, and I wasn't aware that Russians knew that this was actually the case. I once asked a friend of mine what was in his sandwich, and he said, it's meat. I said, yeah, but what kind of meat? And he looked at me as if I was stupid or I was from another planet. What do you mean meat? It's meaty meat. What do you expect in a meat sandwich? Meat. And this I thought, does it matter to you what kind of meat you're eating? It turns out all meat is pork. If you want a different kind of meat, you have to say something else. But that was kind of strange for me.
We Russians have, I would say, odd things about us, which we just accepted a long time ago about meat, about water, about drinking. If we say something about drinking, normal people would assume that we're talking about water or some beverage, but no, Russians usually talk about spirits.
Yeah, definitely.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
I know that Russia was always a boogeyman in the eyes of Western media. What was your real opinion on the background of knowing what British people, Americans, Europeans thought about Russia? What was your real opinion when you met with some of us?
It all looked a bit like a Cold War movie set when I first came in the 90s. Everyone still wore the big Soviet hats. There were still all the Soviet buses that were going around. Nothing really had changed greatly from the pictures you saw on the news in the evening. I think the idea of Russia as the enemy in those days excited me quite a lot. Now it simply irritates me. But in those days, I was excited that I was going to this place which was sort of taboo. Now, lots of people had visited the Soviet Union. In fact, tourism went down in the 1990s. It had been quite high. Plenty of people visited the Soviet Union. But the idea of the Soviet Union as the enemy, when I was growing up, it was sort of monolithic. You never thought it would go away, and people came to an agreement that it was a bad place and that Russians were probably responsible for a lot of bad things. But there was this sort of soft side that you could love these people. I mean, there were some media celebrations of Russians. Sting released a song called Russians in the 1980s, which was, I hope the Russians love their children too. And Elton John sang about Nikita. I'm presuming that he didn't know that it was a boy's name, but maybe he did. But so there was a very strange relationship. So in the West, of sort of the Soviet mentality was often parodied as well. The idea of a Russian stereotype. It was used to soften the edges of what was the Cold War. So I grew up as a child in the Cold War. And then when the 90s arrived, I was already a teenager. I was already aware of these things. So it simply just became exciting. And the propaganda in the 1990s was all pro-Russian. Welcome to the world. Welcome back to the Western ways of understanding the world, which was it's sort of, we've won, what next? That sort of idea. So when I was in Russia, I thought that everything had changed. I thought that everything in the mindset had flipped over, and now you could go and buy your TV and video cassettes and all this sort of thing. But the reality when I hit the ground was that this was a society in massive change, dealing with real social and economic problems. And it was actually a disaster that was happening in front of my eyes. And very quickly, when I woke up to this fact, I started to become more sophisticated in my opinion. And the opinions that I was hearing the most of were worried opinions. Russians were worried about the future. They didn't know what was going to happen tomorrow. They didn't know how much their money was going to be worth. They didn't know anything about this. So the shock for me was not cultural, because I was a young man and I could take everything in my stride. But what was a shock for me was how disorganized the society become, how hard the edges around society become, how people had to cope with extreme difficulty. There's no food in the shops, and even if there is food, you don't have the money to buy it. This was a real problem. No one was getting their pensions. The health system had broken down. The drugs you needed to buy were more expensive than they'd ever been. And so for me, the shock was not so much the culture, it was the situation.
So you caught the dire footprint that was left on Russia?
I didn't judge it in that way. I didn't see communism as being to blame.
No.
I didn't think about communism at all, really. I mean, it's quite bizarre, but I never thought of the Soviet Union as a political system in those days. I sort of knew it was different in some way, but I simply assumed it was the opposite bloc. I didn't really understand what it was like to live in the Soviet Union until I actually arrived in the 1990s and saw the result of that. But it never felt like, the Russians have put themselves in it here. It felt like, here is a human disaster, and I'm now in the middle of it, but I've got a ticket to go home. These people don't. They live here.
So, you said that you had a ticket to go home, but you obviously didn't. What compelled you to stay here?
Well, I did go home, and then I came back a couple of years ago after living in the UK for a long time. So I came back after 20 years living in the UK to make a new career here and a life here, because I never lost my fascination with this country, and I never lost my fascination with the language and the culture and the history and the politics that go on here. And I found myself defending Russia, as I said in the intro. I found myself defending Russia to my friends, and it just it became a natural step for me to come back here when my life took, a turn. Suddenly the opportunities for moving on with my life and changing the things that I was doing, Russia popped up, and I thought, why not go out there and teach English? And here I am doing that. So I did go home, and I came back to a different place. This is a different country to the one that I visited in the 1990s.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
Do you have any advice you would like to give someone who's coming to Russia for their very first time and expecting to see there, I don't know, some demons, some strange creatures were unhuman, the way we're portrayed in Western media?
Well, if you cross any border and try going to America, the border guards tend to be quite miserable looking. Bureaucracy is monolithic. Have your papers in order. You need that wherever you go. We're sort of used to, in Europe at least, traveling freely around Europe and not being asked for anything except a brief flash of your passport at the border. Now, Britain, that's going to change possibly soon with Brexit happening. But as we go to air, as we record this, Brexit still hasn't happened. I don't know whether it ever will. Well, we'll find out. But the fact is, if you have all your papers in order, coming into Russia is absolutely fine. My advice is don't take a taxi from the airport because they'll sting you for a lot of money. My advice to anyone coming to Russia is prepare ahead of time and find yourself a local guide. If you're not familiar with Russian language, then even finding the exit sign in the airport can be difficult. Someone with a knowledge of Russian is a good idea. If you can't go with an individual guide, I would suggest coming to an organization. And really, this is an amazing place to discover. Russia is unlike any place you'll ever go in your life. It's full of very interesting people who I will introduce you all to in the fullness of time. If you've ever thought about coming to Russia, don't think about it, make it reality. Russia has some of the most amazing art treasures in the world. If you go to St. Petersburg, it's a very European-looking city. You can go to the Hermitage, which is bigger than the Louvre, with more art treasures. It's got incredible, rich cultural heritage that you can discover not once, but many times. People catch a bug for this country, possibly because of the negative media that's attached to it. It feels like a dangerous place to come. It feels like you're breaking a taboo coming here. Actually, you're not. You're coming to one of the most wonderful countries on the planet, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, especially nowadays, young people like to be contrarian. So when media says them, no, of course they want to come. Why wouldn't they? It's something that people dread, so they won't be dead, else they want to be something special.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is that, but there's also, for older people who want to travel here, retired people, the facilities are here. You will get a fluffy pillow. You will get internet access. The restaurants are fantastic. The food in this country is amazing if you know where to look. You can buy your food off the street, but if you do that in New York, if you do that in London, you're taking the same risks as you are in Moscow. So if you buy it from a restaurant, you're looking at some of the best cuisine. It's just a wonderful place to visit and explore, and the culture is amazing.
You started our interview with mocking our soup with cabbage, and now you say that you like our cuisine.
Yeah.
You know what just occurred to me? I think Nikita is a unisex name.
Really?
Yes, because I know a few girls who are named Nikita.
Well, there you go. Well, that tells us a lot about Elton John.
Indeed, he was illiterate, especially about Russia.
Indeed.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
I work at Belgorod State University. One of my colleagues is Vladislav Kuchmisty, who is a vice rector here, which is quite senior. And he deals with all of the international affairs of the university and is well placed to talk to me today about how people come into the university and the experience of foreigners coming to Russia to study here. The university has been recognized by the Ministry of Education for the quality of the graduates coming out. A lot of them are in demand in science and tech, and the university is keen to highlight this fact.
We have about 3,000 international students from more than 90 countries of the world study at the university now. Our university is a university which has become an alma mater for more than 25,000 international students. And they really come from all over the world.
So where do they come from?
Well, actually, they come from Latin America, from Asia, from China, Far East, from Africa. Really, all the continents are represented by the students at our university.
What's the largest group, do you know?
The largest group, well, difficult to say. I think that the majority of international students at the Medical Institute come from India and the Near East. We have a huge international body of international students that come from China at the Institute of Economic Management. We have a large body of international students coming from Latin America, from Ecuador especially. They choose residency programs at the Medical Institute. Of course, the majority of international students come from the Ukraine, and it is quite natural, I believe.
So that'll actually surprise some of our listeners that so many of our students come from Ukraine. So you say it's quite a natural thing. Why is that?
Well, it's quite natural because we are on the border with Ukraine. I'm in Belgorod region, and we are in the distance of 60 kilometers from Kharkov. In the Soviet time, it was one of the greatest university cities of Ukraine. It has quite a lot of institutes and universities. And that is why it is really quite natural for the former time to have very close connections and relations with the universities of Kharkov. That is why we had quite a lot of exchange students and we had exchange programs. But now the majority of Ukrainian students come not from Kharkov, but from other regions. It is connected with politics. That's why I'm not quite eager about speaking about it.
Well, I mean, it's interesting to our listeners to know that, I mean, I suppose when they imagine Ukrainian and Russian relations, they imagine, soldiers at the border and it being a sealed border, but that's not really the case, is it?
Well, as for me, I can't say that I can imagine soldiers on the borders. I haven't seen any of them so far, but I think that the frustrated relations between two countries, of course, influence the number of students and the intensivity of academic relations between the universities of Russia and Ukraine.
But there is still a good relationship.
We have a good body of international students from Ukraine. That is the answer to your question. So, I'd like to mention that all those numbers of international students is a challenge for us. That is why we've been striving to create that infrastructure or support structure for international students. We are striving to build up a good environment that is going to be friendly for international students. And it's really a big challenge for us.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
Vladislav then went on to outline the support structures that the university has in place for dealing with international relations, as it were. One of them is the Centre for Foreign Languages and Academic Writing, which is to support academics who are trying to publish their papers in English abroad. The other one that he mentioned and went on to talk about was the evaluation centres that the university is involved in. This is where Russian universities send people out from the university to foreign countries for the benefit of students who want to take up places here in Russia. And this is a sort of one-stop shop for anybody looking to study in Russia. There's also the Center for Cross-Cultural Communications, which is a place where students from around the world come to show off their own cultures at home, and it's a place where they can also meet. There's also the Russian Language Testing Center, which assesses students for their Russian language skills and helps them to achieve the level they need to study here.
Well, we're trying to do anything we can to facilitate our students, future students, to have this admission process much easier and not that painful for them. I'd like to mention about psychological service for students. It is really important for international students because they are deprived of their family relations because of distance, because of time lag, because of different things. And here they should be somehow integrated into social life. They should not feel themselves just behind that communication circle and social circle of the university. That is why we launched that center which provides psychological support for them.
And these are trained psychologists that are working there, yeah?
Yeah.
Trained here?
Well, yes. And the professors and our best students participated in this activity to help, to facilitate the staying of international students at our university.
Yeah, so acclimatization is a big thing.
Yeah,
here,
of course.
Yeah.
And not only that, we have different habits, and traveling to another country, to another world, we have to say goodbye to our habits and to acquire new habits and traditions.
Like eating cabbage soup.
Yeah, why not? One of them who is fond of cabbage at such kind of dishes. Well, I can't but mention about the preparatory faculty for foreign nationals. That's the first step and the first structure of integration, social integration into our academic life.
Is that like a foundation course? Is that what you're saying? Like
yeah,
foundation
exactly.
Year?
Foundation courses, right. Mm-hmm. And they spend from 1 to 1.5 years studying different subjects helpful for them.
Including the Russian language?
Yes, of course. It's above all, Russian language above all. And I know that the level of Russian language command is very high, and we are really proud of it. But because we have a very good experience starting in 1980s when this faculty was organized and launched.
Designed around the idea that a healthy body equals a healthy mind. The university has a lot of different facilities for sport here, both of the mental variety and the physical variety, and has a world-class centre in the Korkina Sports Centre just across the river, which is also part of the university setup.
Alongside this, I'd like to mention system of social support, which includes scholarship programs for students, psychological support, accommodation in comfortable dormitories, facilities for handicapped students. And to crown it all, the university is implementing the Health Promotion Target Program and Accessibility Target Program. So we really are busy in creating these equal opportunities for all categories of students and international students as well.
Let's summarize a few of those things. Belgorod State University is a provincial university. Moscow seems to get all the attention most of the time, but we're really specialist in quite a few things at the moment, aren't we? So material science and language is really a big thing for us now. So we're on the rise. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, we are on the rise. We've been on the rise for several last years, I think so. And I don't think that Belgorod State University is a kind of provincial university because it has just a bit negative connotation, I should say.
I disagree.
I think that it would be better to say that Belgorod State University is located in the province of Russia, but it doesn't mean that it's a provincial university. At least our ambitions are not that of provincial university.
Well, I'll point that out, that Oxford and Cambridge are also in provinces in the UK, so we don't have a negative connotation
and do
on
you
that
call
one necessarily.
them, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Do you call them
provincial?
Provincial university.
Well, I do, but I went to Glasgow, so...
that explains everything.
That explains that.
You're listening to Understanding Russia.
So walk me through what happens when you apply for university. What's the first point of contact? How does it go from there?
Well, I think that it is much easier these days to establish that contact with the university you want to study in. And usually, and it's a tendency or it's a trend of nowadays, usually the students visit the official website of the university and try to find the admission committee or admission office contacts. They write, they call, they ask their friends that are the students of the university to get that additional information. So the best way to get more information about the university is to visit its website. Of course, we are represented at different educational exhibitions and forums. I think that's another good opportunity to find more information, actual and true information about the university. In different countries, the information about the university is represented at the Centers for Science and Culture, as we call it, Россотрудничество.
That's the international organization for Russian...
which promotes the education at Russian universities.
Yeah.
So if questions remain, so all these people who want to study at the university can contact our admission office and ask these questions. After that, they will be advised about the procedure, about the documents they need to submit to the admission office.
Do they get issued with visas by the educational establishment, or do they have to go through the normal visa system?
Yes, of course. We send that visa application to the future student, and, he submits that application to the embassy to get their visa issued.
And it's really just a formality, of course,
yes,
because once they've been accepted into the university.
Course.
Do we meet them at the airport? What happens there?
Mostly, if we know the exact date and time when they arrive at Belgorod Airport, our students or our, officials meet them at the airport, and it's very useful. I mean, our international office, they are students who help the admission office to meet people, to conduct them to the office itself, and to help them find their way through all that procedure of admission procedure.
So these are students actually getting involved with this. Yeah. So the first point of contact they have is with fellow students.
Yes, and we ask our students who are the members of that international students office to help us, and they do it eagerly and they do it on a regular basis. It doesn't mean that they finish their international job when this foreign student is enrolled to the university. They do it after that admission period when they are the first year students as well.
So when I've seen lots of people running around the university looking like they're from Latin America and speaking Spanish, that's this office that you talk about. They're doing their work. Is that what you're saying, yeah?
Yes, exactly. And they do their work not only in Spanish, they have language commands. They do it in English, they do it in German and French, though we do not have so many students from Germany and France. Nevertheless, our students are multilingual students. That's why they're very handy.
So as they progress through the university, they're acclimatized, they do these foundation courses, and they're given full visa support by the international office. They have international students. Are there any international associations? Do they have their own clubs or their own evenings of support for each other?
Yes, of course. International Student Office, among their activities, conduct all those clubs. German, Chinese, English, of course, Spanish. So they help the freshmen to get integrated into the student society, into the student community. And it really helps, because when they come to these clubs and they try to communicate, they try to express themselves and try to make friends, and they do make friends. And that is the best thing, just to feel you at ease at the new university and to feel you comfortable and cozy.
Russians are very friendly, and of course it helps to speak Russian, so their new Russian friends are helping them with the process of acclimatization as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is a success story for them. It's really actually a welcoming environment. So what about the other end? When students graduate, when they've done their studies in Russian, there are some lectures in the medical school which are in English as well, of course. Do we have any further contact? Do we know what they go on to do? What happens to them after they leave here?
Well, this year it was the first year when they graduated from English program. I mean, the students of that institute. And we tried to establish further ties with them. And it's one of the tasks of the Association of International Students. We're trying to make the community, and right now we are picking up all those students from different parts of the world, but most of them are from India. And I think that by next summer, we'll have the first information about their future career and about their future, life after the university. Some of them took the decision to go on at the university and they took their residential programs, and some of them want to have their postgraduate studies at the university. So that means that they were rather comfortable and cozy while studying at the university, and that means a lot to us. That means they don't want to change the university because, they respect this university and they are proud of being part of it, and that's why they go on studying here.
On that note, it's been a great pleasure speaking to you, Vladislav. I hope to have you on again to talk about other aspects of the university. But for now, thank you very much.
You're listening to Understanding Russia. Now it's time to meet a student who I met recently. She's from Vietnam and her name is Nguyet. She's had a dream of coming to Russia for a long time. Just exactly how long that was the first question I had for her.
Me coming to Russia was my plan for 10 years.
10 years?
10 years I planned it.
So you were, 8 years old? 9?
9.
So what about Russia? Why?
Well, we lived in Ukraine before with my parents, and then we moved back to Vietnam. I kind of didn't like Vietnam at that time because it was obviously a cultural shock for me. And I dreamed of coming back to Russia. And then there were 2 years without any Russian language. And then in the 6th grade, I began studying at a school where they taught Russian language. I kind of loved it again, fell in love with it again. And I decided that I want to have it in my life. So the only way after finishing school is going to Russia. So in the 6th grade, I understood already that my way is heading to Russia.
So you mentioned then that you grew up in Ukraine with Vietnamese parents. Were you born in Ukraine?
No, I wasn't born in Ukraine. I was born in Vietnam, and when I was 3 years old, my mom brought me to Ukraine, kind of joined my father there, worked always there. Either in Russia or Ukraine, and just visited our family in Vietnam a couple of times. In 97, he visited my mother, and then I came to life. So in 2000, she decided that it's time her husband came home. So she brought me there with her. Kind of wanted some moral pressure on him, but something went wrong. It took 6 years.
6 years of moral pressure. That's pretty good. Well, what's your your birth language?
I'm not sure what is my birth language because I was born in Vietnam, but at 3 years old, I was brought to Russia, to Kharkiv. So the first language I spoke was Russian because people speak Russian in Kharkiv. But inside the family, my parents always made me speak Vietnamese. It was with bad accent because there are tons in Vietnamese language, but I couldn't do it. Basically, I spoke 2 languages in Kharkiv, but then in Vietnam, I spoke only Vietnamese. I was surrounded by Vietnamese people, Vietnamese culture, Vietnamese language and literature, and Russian was only taught as a foreign language. So I tend to think that my birth language, my first language is Vietnamese, because sometimes when I get tired, I always ask my friends time in Vietnamese.
Ah, right. So that is
And
a
I
good
count
indicator.
in Vietnamese.
And do you dream in Vietnamese?
No, I dream in both languages, not even in 2 languages, but in 3 or 4, but I count in Vietnamese.
Do you feel like you've mastered both languages to the point where you're never lost for words?
Vietnamese, yes. Russian, not sure.
Your English is very good. Where did you learn that?
I learned it here in Russia, in Belgorod State University.
Really? Very
Yes,
good.
I came here with zero knowledge of English.
Wow, and you're proficient now, I think. So, you chose to come to Belgorod State University?
Yes.
You did?
I mean, I chose coming to Russia, but then the destiny decided for me.
Right.
It was destiny.
It was destiny.
Sure.
Your fate was to come here.
Yes.
And you chose to do English or languages in general? Are you doing any other languages?
Well, I wanted to do other languages other than Russian, just Russian language, because in 2014, I joined some kind of an international contest for Russian language learners, and I won a prize there. But I saw that the guys there, they spoke not only Russian, but other languages. And then I came to the point that, why do I speak only Russian? So the only way out was learning other languages. Learning other languages means translation and interpretation, probably the only way. So I came here and chose English because, English seemed popular and still seems popular now.
I'm glad to hear it. You speak how many languages then, would you say?
Fluently, or just...
Well, in general.
In general, I speak Vietnamese, Russian as my mother tongues, 2 mother tongues, German, a little bit of Spanish. I understand Ukrainian, but I can't speak. I don't know the structure of the language. And I can understand a little bit of Chinese because there was time when I learned Chinese.
So a little bit of everything. But you're not attracted to Asian languages, Japanese, Chinese particularly?
Why not? I was attracted to Chinese, but the thing is, in 2019, I went to Germany for a language course, and I was so involved in it, and I just gave up Chinese. I learned Chinese. I had been learning Chinese for 6 months until that moment, and I had level 2 or something, or what they call it, HSK 2. My tutors told me that it was quite a progress, but then I gave up Chinese for German.
So that's good, I suppose, I think. You went back to Vietnam. Did you feel at home there?
To be honest, for me, home is where your parents are, your relatives are, your memories are.
How did you explain it to your friends? Did you say, well...
I don't miss Vietnam. I don't miss it.
You don't miss it?
No. I miss the memories. I miss my family. I miss the food. I miss very particular things about Vietnam, but not the country itself, because, I couldn't get used to the society there, unfortunately.
A different mentality?
Sure.
You're listening to Understanding Russia. In what way?
Bullying in school, it's much harsher than it is here in Russia, I swear. My classmates didn't understand me until 11th grade. There are 12 grades in Vietnam, and we study from the 6th grade together. All the 6 years, we didn't change any classes or school, but 5 years of suffering from bullying, they were hard for me.
Were they picking on you particularly because of your difference, or was it generally a culture?
It was partially culture, but probably it was because I was too good at studying. I was always studying, always having best marks, and teachers, they were not feeling uncomfortable about telling the whole class, the whole group that I'm the best. And, children, they are not the best people, and they may become jealous.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's true everywhere, but it's how it's controlled, I think. So teachers, were the class sizes big in Vietnam?
Yes. In middle school, it is usually 40 children in a class. And then in my school, high school, there were 30 children per class. So a little bit less, but not much.
You felt that the education was better in Ukraine?
No, the education is surely better in Vietnam, especially in the schools where I studied, because they were the best schools. Well, my middle school was one of the best of the province where I lived, but my high school was top 3 of the country, and there were always golden prizes from international contests that a student from my school won.
So very high standards.
Sure. I won one.
Yeah. You won a gold medal?
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. What was it in?
In Russian language.
In Russian. Well, yeah, okay. That's one thing to do. When you explained Ukraine to Vietnamese people, what was the main thing they thought about? Did they think about it at all? And the opposite question, when you explain Vietnam to Russians and Ukrainians, what do you find yourself saying over and over again?
People don't really know Ukraine and Russia. They don't really differ, the two countries, because of the Soviet time. So the first time when I came back to Vietnam, my granddad, he always asked me how was there in the Soviet Union. And I was, Soviet Union? And I was small. I was only 9 years old. I didn't know what is Soviet Union. I just knew that there was Ukraine and there was Russia, and there are two different countries. But I was shocked with Soviet. Everybody's asking about Soviet, but it came with time, and I understood. And they were asking about snow. Does it snow all the time? Is it cold all the time? Is there any summer? What do you eat there? Are there any vegetables? Because Vietnamese eat a lot of vegetables, but not meat. And then they ask about, yes, beers, vodka, and stuff. They ask about how I lived there with my parents. Was it hard? But I was a child. I didn't even notice when my parents went to work at the local market, a very big one. And the childhood in Ukraine was nice for me. So I just told everybody, well, it was nice, no problems, no bullying, conflicts. Although my parents told me, I do remember that my parents told me during the times of elections, don't go out. I didn't understand why, but now I do understand, because the elections in Ukraine were always with conflicts.
That's true. You're listening to Understanding Russia. And what about Russia? You came to Russia. Why did you choose Russia? I mean, you were raised in Ukraine. Why didn't you decide to stay there?
Well, quite a practical, I would say, reason. It's the political situation seems more stable here. The country is bigger. The economy is more developed. Infrastructure is more developed. I think there are more international students here and more chances for them to, I mean, not just to stay here, but to learn something and bring back to the country.
And what about Vietnam? Do you see a future, I suppose, mediating between Vietnamese culture and Russian culture? Do you think there's much of a market for that?
Yes, there is a huge market, at least for translators and interpreters. The thing is that Vietnamese now, they do learn English, and they are trying hard to learn English, to speak at least one foreign language. But in Russia, the situation is a bit different. Relatively few people speak foreign language, especially English. They still need translators to communicate with the world. So either you translate between Russian and Vietnamese, or you use English to mediate between the two cultures.
That's interesting. So you may have a future introducing Vietnamese people to Russian culture, or vice versa.
I already have had this experience. I'm working now as a freelancer, as a freelance translator. So I'm trying to do it.
Yeah, I know your translation skills are brilliant because I use them too. What about the future? Are you planning to stay in Russia, or are you planning to move anywhere particular? What general plans do you have for the future?
You know, when I went to Russia, the only clear plan I had was coming to Russia. After that, I had no idea what to do. I just told myself, well, okay, I'm just going to study well, and then we're going to see maybe Europe, maybe coming back to Vietnam. Firstly, I wanted to come back to Vietnam because my parents have a shoe store there. I mean, the financial basis is already in waiting for me, but then we have some conflicts in our family, and I decided not to come back. Staying in Russia, well, I dreamt of it. I thought of it 2 years ago. I don't think that I could earn as much as I would earn with my skills in other countries, for example, in Europe or something, or at least in bigger cities, but not our city.
You're listening to Understanding Russia. Okay, what's the one thing that you love about Russia above anything else, would you say?
The cuisine.
You like the food?
Sure, I love the food. My Vietnamese friends always ask me how could I eat the siliotka.
Herring is everywhere, yeah.
And then how could I eat the bloody kravyanka and the vogla, the dried fish.
Uh-huh.
They call it fish corpse.
Well, I mean, if you come from Vietnam, I'd imagine fish is on the menu every day.
Sure, but it's fresh.
It's fresh. Exactly. It's the same in Britain. In Britain, we're so spoiled because fresh fish is everywhere. And in Vietnam, exactly the same, I'd imagine. But in Russia, we are many, 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 many kilometers from the sea here. So how the fish gets here, we don't know. We dry it and ship it. That's what we do. You really do like the food.
I do like Russian food, but I do cook Vietnamese food and other food.
You love your food.
I love eating.
Yeah, but it's amazing. You're so tiny and yet you love your food. But anyway, I digress. If there's one thing you could change about Russia, exchange, if you like, with Vietnam or any other country you've lived in, what would it be? Yeah, you could change one thing out for another, for example. What would you import from Vietnamese culture or Ukrainian culture into Russia to replace something Russian? What do you say?
I would not think about replacement, but I would like to bring some warmth from Vietnam to Russia because I'm allergic to the cold. And I'm seriously talking about this allergy because when it gets to -10 and if I stay outside for more than 10 or 15 minutes, it begins to itch everywhere, literally everywhere. And if I don't have my pills, I'm going to die.
That's interesting. At the moment, I'm reading a lot of Chinese history, and Chinese history is full of Chinese armies going south into Vietnam and dying from diseases and the heat and the jungle. And you've gone in the other opposite direction and you're having the same problems.
But then from Russia to Vietnam, I would like Russian prices, car prices in Vietnam, because the car prices in Vietnam are very high now. Automobiles are very expensive.
And indeed, you could buy yourself a house.
Sure, a house. They could have bought me a house, a flat here, but they chose to buy a car in Vietnam.
So this is the source of your conflict with your parents?
Maybe. One of them.
It's been very nice talking to you.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed this interview. Have you enjoyed yourself? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to Understanding Russia. I'd like to thank all our guests today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, feel free to share it with your friends. If you want to contact us, you can get in touch with us via our website at urpod.net, where you can find all our social media links, or via email, understandingrussia@gmail.com. We will be very happy to hear from you. You have been listening to Understanding Russia, a student-led podcast from Belgorod State University.